going to do a trig function, tangent. I don't know if we've looked at graphs of tangent in this class. I'll go ahead and just graph it before we do the problem, and you're going to see what I'm talking about. It looks a little weird. Definitely different than sine. All right, here's the graph of tangent. There's a bunch of asymptotes on this graph, okay? Wherever there's an asymptote, there can't be a derivative, right? Because it doesn't even exist there. And so we need to figure out where these asymptotes are. To do that, we're going to take the derivative and figure out what we get from there. So maybe remember what the derivative of tangent is. I'll give you a hint. It involves secant. Secant squared. Thank you. So f prime of x is secant squared. Now the real question is, how do we figure out where the derivative doesn't exist? This goes back to those reciprocal rules I was showing you. Secant can be written as 1 over sine. 1 over cosine. So this function can be written as 1 over cosine squared. And now that we have a fraction, we know the bottom of the fraction can't be equal to 0. So we're ultimately going to be taking cosine squared and setting it equal to 0. Okay, so we know cosine squared is not equal to 0. I'll give you a hint for this one. It's going to be the same as when cosine doesn't equal to 0. Because when you take the square root of both of those, you still just get 0 back. Okay, so cosine of x cannot be equal to 0. This one's not going to be on the worksheet, so don't get too worked up on this one. This is a formula that will give you every point on the unit circle where cosine equals 0. For example, let's say n was 1. You plug in 1, let's say n was 0. Plug in 0, you get pi over 2. On the unit circle at pi over 2, you'd have a 90-degree angle, and your x value would be 0, so cosine would be 0. Okay, so that means that x could not be equal to pi over 2. If you plugged in 1, you get 3 pi over 2. If you plugged in 2, you get 5 pi over 2. Any time that fraction has an odd coefficient would be where cosine is equal to 0. So basically what we've found is for all of these x values is where those asymptotes are. And that's where the derivative wouldn't exist. There's not going to be a y value here, right? Because they're asymptotes, so there's no y value there. So there's a trig example.